All right, the year's winding down. The holiday slowdown season is just around the corner, but temperatures aren't the only thing that's dropping. So are our boot camp prices. Don't let yourself get pulled into the holiday cookies on the couch downtime just yet, because Cyberwork listeners will get $500 off most live online boot camps through the end of the year. If you're looking to land your first cybersecurity job, maybe you'll consider earning your Security Plus certification. This can be your first big stepping stone in your cybersecurity journey. And if you want to really make your resume stand out in the pile, you might want to earn your CISSP. That's one heck of a leg up. You're going to be holding the most requested certification in cybersecurity job listings in the US at the moment. But whatever your career goals, we have training for you. We've got certs from CompTIA, ISACA, ISC Squared, EC Council, Cisco, Microsoft, and more. And keep watching this channel through the end of the year, because in the middle of each episode, I'll be showing you around some of the offerings in some of our top boot camps so that you can see what you would be learning on your path to certification, and it becomes a little more real for you. All right, look, the best gift you can give to future you of 2024 is taking decisive action now and smashing holiday season malaise with the gift of certification. Book an upcoming course before December 31st, 2023 and save $500 on your live online bootcamp training. And just when you thought gift giving season was over, well, okay, I'll give you one more. Your training comes with an exam pass guarantee. Now, that means if you don't pass your exam on the first attempt, we'll provide a second attempt at no extra cost to you. I mean, come on. So don't snooze. Take decisive action in your career. Go to infosecinstitute.com/free to learn more. Again, that's infosecinstitute.com/free and book your next certification bootcamp today. Now, don't worry about it. Don't overthink about it. And don't let the last couple of months of 2023 go on cruise control. Trust me, you are ready right now. But are you ready for today's episode of Cyberwork? Well, I hope so, because here it comes now. Today on Cyberwork, I speak with AJ Grotto, the William J. Perry International Security Fellow and founding director of the Program of Geopolitics, Technology, and Governance at the Stanford Policy Center and Stanford University. AJ has served in the National Cybersecurity Council under 2 successive presidents and brings decades of knowledge in international relations, policy, and risk, both to his students and to clients in his private sector consulting work. AJ tells us about the current state of international cyber risk and response, gives us his tip for students just getting started in international policy, and why a suspicious-looking email took him away from his law profession and into the security space. It is a new twist on the cybersecurity origin story, and you don't want to miss it or miss this episode of Cyberwork. Welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. Each week, we talk with a different industry thought leader about cybersecurity trends, the way those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, while offering tips for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. My guest today, Andrew Grotto, is the William J. Perry International Security Fellow at Stanford University and the founding director of the Program on Geopolitics, Technology, and Governance at the Stanford Cyber Policy Center. He serves as the faculty lead for the Cyber Policy and Security Specialization in Stanford's Ford Dorsey Masters in International Policy degree program and teaches the core cyber policy course for the specialization. He is also a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution. He served as a senior director for cyber policy on the National Security Council during the Obama and Trump administrations from late 2015 through May of 2017. So today, as you would imagine, we're going to take advantage of AJ's considerable knowledge around geopolitics and security, and we're going to talk all about that today. So AJ, thanks for joining me today and welcome to Cyberwork.
Thanks, Chris. It's good to be here.
So you've had a long history, obviously, of security innovation and analysis, and you had a set of security policies, across a broad spectrum of federal sectors, from healthcare to consumer cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, and 2 presidential administrations. So my first question is, what was the initial moment or inspiration that started your full immersion into all things cybersecurity? Was there a formative experience in tech and security that caused you to pursue this path so passionately?
Yes, there was actually. So by way of background, I'm a lawyer by training, and coming out of law school, my goal was to be a law professor. My area of expertise was international trade law. And my plan was to go to Washington, D.C., spend a couple of years maybe working on the Hill, get some policy experience, and then go on the academic market for law professorships. So I moved to Washington, D.C. with that in mind. And while I was looking for a full-time job, I thought I'd be a good idea to intern, spend my time, instead of sitting at home, hitting refresh on my email for leads.
Right.
And so I ended up, interning at a think tank called the Center for American Progress, which was brand new when I started. Originally, they wanted me to work on some trade issues, but eventually, through some twists and turns, I ended up working on nuclear non-proliferation policy. So how to deal with, nuclear programs in Iran, North Korea, what we should do in the United States with our own nuclear arsenal. Mm-hmm. And I worked on that for about 5 years. And this now we're sort of hitting 2008. I frankly was getting kind of bored with nuclear non-proliferation, not because it's not an exciting issue and the stakes are high, but I just felt that the playbook for proliferation crises has kind of already been written. Yeah. And so, when
you're basically
happens,
you're kind of maintaining something rather than innovating something new. Is that it?
Yeah. And so I got to thinking about, okay, what's an area that I can, jump into where it's a little bit more of a green field as far as policy goes. Right. And as I'm thinking this through, I get an email from my boss at the time, John Podesta. Mm-hmm. And or at least the email was purporting to be from John. Politely asking me to read a new report on Russian nuclear forces. And I could tell immediately from the tone of the email that this was not from John. So I forwarded it to our IT staff, and sure enough, it was an attempt by the Chinese PLA to hack into our systems. Mm-hmm. As we later learned, there was a whole campaign by Chinese military intelligence to hack into think tanks in Washington, as well as both the Obama and McCain presidential campaigns. Yeah. And so that was my moment where I was like, maybe the cyber thing is where I should go. Yeah. So that was the moment where I sort of the light bulb went off, and wow. And here I am.
Yeah, I bet the person who sent you, or the bot that sent you that attachment didn't know what was happening in terms of what it would turn you into. It's like they
created a monster.
It was the radioactive spider that launched a whole line of comic books here. So moving on to that, your career history includes some amazingly high profile positions within the U.S. government. You mentioned a little bit about that, including senior director for cybersecurity policy at the National Security Council, advising 2 successive presidents on digital technology innovation, geopolitics, and risk. And you also led senior level teams to develop and deliver presidential priorities. So without violating any NDAs or anything, could you break down what the actual nuts and bolts of those tasks were? Were you conducting independent research? Were you, making specific recommendations? Were you implementing these recommendations? What was involved?
So the mission of the National Security Council is to coordinate national security policy across all the different parts of the government, and then to serve as an advisor for the president. Mm-hmm. And so that was my job, and in cyber policy, where my main area of focus was on more of the defensive side of cyber policy. So coordinating the defense of U.S. critical infrastructure, so banks, healthcare, communications and whatnot. And then, advising, and coordinating policy to some extent on sort of the dark side of cyber, the offensive side, but really focused on defense. I like defense. I played football, when I was younger, and defense was always my favorite, side of the ball. And so what that means, practically speaking, what coordination means, practically speaking, is when a problem emerges, a Russian hacking campaign against the electric grid, someone needs to bring together all the different parts of the government that have something to contribute to solving that problem, right? So that could include law enforcement, could include the Department of Homeland Security, which has responsibility for critical infrastructure, the Department of Energy, which has a lot of expertise and regulatory authority in energy, as well as the intelligence community and the military. And what the senior director does is, working with colleagues at these different departments and agencies, is try to develop options for the president. And there's a whole sort of command structure that this process follows. So we would develop options for deputy cabinet ministers that would then go up to sort of the cabinet, the heads of departments, so the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and then on to the president. And that's the way the system works. So in some sense, my job was herding cats.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you were, yeah. I was going to say it's a lot of getting the sort of tops of each organization to all sort of get into one room together, literally or figuratively, and come to an agreement. And then it sounds like you were so you had like a set of like, okay, we could do plan A, plan B, plan C kind of thing for the president, and then they sign off on it kind of thing.
That's right. And
yeah.
And then we would also make sure that there was follow through.
Right. Yeah.
The president's vision is then actually implemented.
Things were actually happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
So no matter how high the job title is or the responsibilities are, I'm always dying to sort of break it into sort of individual skill sets and tasks. So like what areas of your skill set got the biggest workout when you were doing this type of work? Like what were the parts that really you felt yourself stretching to sort of make this all work?
Management and building leadership, right? Building coalitions, trying to identify points of consensus that you could build on when there's broader disagreement. In my experience, most cybersecurity problems, whether they're at sort of that level of national policy or at the level of an enterprise, almost always involve humans in some form or another, right?
Sure.
Like they're human problems, not necessarily just technical problems. And so, having sort of human skills, knowing how to deal with people, knowing how to communicate effectively, all of those skills were key to performance in that role.
Gotcha. So yeah, okay, that's great. Do you feel like, for instance, your law background, like in terms of like crafting like the arguments, or do you feel like it was okay? You knew what you needed to get done. It was just a matter of getting people to sort of agree with you.
I am a big fan of law school.
Yeah.
Even if graduates don't necessarily practice law, because I think it's great training, especially for policy roles where you're having to make arguments, adjudicate arguments, all in a legal context, right? At the end of the day, we want to do what's legal, not what's not legal.
Yeah.
And so having sort of that muscle memory and sort of in place is I've always found to be really valuable. Obviously, law school is not for everybody, but for me, it really kind of hit the mark in terms of my professional development.
Yeah, and clearly, starting somewhere that's not heavy tech is not necessarily a barrier to entry into heavy tech, roles that's later on in life. Because again, we have a lot of people who are taking their first, either bold or trepidatious step into cybersecurity from other career points, and so including law, obviously. So always good to hear those types of anecdotes and experiences and so forth. So,
well, just to pick up on your point, I mean, there are certain job functions in cyber policy that are technical, right? And you need technical skills in order to fill those jobs, but there are an awful lot of positions that aren't. They may have a technical dimension, but they're not, strictly speaking, technical jobs. And so, coming back to my example of Russia and the electric grid, as an example or hypothetical, that's a Russia problem as much as it is a cyber problem. And so, the skills that must be brought to bear on a problem like that include understanding how Vladimir Putin thinks, or at least trying to understand how he thinks, understanding their vulnerabilities, not just in the cyber sense of the word, but politically and economically, and having a sense of what would we need to do to shape their behavior. That's a Russia problem, not necessarily or not strictly a cyber problem.
Right. But conversely to that, you still need to have enough of the sort of tech knowledge to not that your sort of theories of how to solve a Russia problem are not so sort of disconnected from the actual technical implementation of it, that they're like, no, we can't do that. You're talking about magic there.
Well, yeah, and even if the policy response is an economic sanction, for example, we want our policy responses to be proportionate, right? In some sense of the word, right? We don't want to overreach. We want them to be proportionate, and it takes some technical skill to be able to evaluate a risk, a cyber risk, and determine, how real is this? Because that then determines or shapes what a proportional response might look like.
Yeah. Okay, so following your time at the National Security Council, you started two back-to-back projects, both of which you maintain to this day. One is behind you on your wallpaper. First of all, you're president and CEO of Sagewood Global Systems, where you advise international clients on emerging issues involving digital risk, including cybersecurity, AI and machine learning, risk management, data governance, CFI US and export controls, as well as helping C-suites develop and implement integrated enterprise strategies for managing digital risks. At the same time, you became director of a program on geopolitics, technology, and governance at the Stanford Cyber Policy Center. So I want to move there next, but I want to start with Sagewood, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm wondering if you could walk me through the types of services and work that you do with your clients at Sagewood. Are these enterprises that already tend to have a solid security policy and strategy in place?
So my clients tend to be companies that want to exert thought leadership in cyber policy.
Okay.
That's one category. The other category are companies who understand that their business is affected by cyber risk, and perhaps digital risks more broadly, including regulatory risk, for example, and they want some help or advice navigating those issues. So in that first category, sort of the thought leadership piece, I will help executives, prepare for high level meetings at places like the World Economic Forum, Davos.
Right.
I will help companies prepare and submit responses to requests for information that regulatory agencies put out when they're vetting a new regulation. So it's helping the company engage in the policy process and show some thought leadership. When it comes to risk advisory, there oftentimes I'm explaining geopolitical dynamics as an example. I was in Hong Kong last week, where I met with a variety of private equity clients to talk about U.S.-China policy, to talk about AI trends in AI regulation in China, as well as the United States and Europe. So those are the two main baskets of issues.
Okay, I mean, within that realm, is there anything? Again, keeping it safe and secure, or whatever, that you're seeing that's particularly interesting right now in terms of sort of like global trends or things that you're monitoring, I should say, I guess, especially closely.
Well, we're in the midst of a surge of activity by governments to regulate cybersecurity.
Right.
Just today, for example, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration's cybersecurity requirements for medical devices, landed. And so we're seeing, not just the U.S. government, but governments around the world, put a lot of thought and effort into regulating cyber risk. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon. For many, many, many years, decades, really, it's been a little bit of a wild west when it comes to cyber risk management and government. We've sort of left it to the private sector to determine for themselves what is an appropriate level of risk to accept or not. And that model works great for most businesses, but when we're talking about critical infrastructure, and where the risks to the society are much higher, then the equation changes, and that's where we're seeing a lot of big changes. On the, I'll share with you, something I picked up on my recent trip to Hong Kong that might be of interest to your listeners. I've been following, China for many, many, many years, and there's always been this sense of excitement about the Chinese market. This trip, I have never encountered such a dark mood towards the Chinese economy as I did on this trip. A lot of talk about pulling money out, moving it elsewhere, and so that was a pretty striking, finding from my visit
now
to Hong Kong.
In terms of sort of like crisis points like that, I'm assuming that changes the landscape considerably in terms of, like, you start, I feel like when economies start going down, maybe that country's cybercrime starts going up, especially towards like other countries. Is there any sort of like relationship like that, like there is with, say, like North Korea and like Lazarus Group or whatever?
The Chinese are so active already that it's hard to imagine them getting
more so.
More
okay, right.
Yeah, I heard an anecdote from an FBI agent out here in Silicon Valley who said that something like 60% of China's industrial espionage budget devoted to the United States is aimed squarely at Silicon Valley. And so I mean that is a huge amount of resources.
Yeah, that's our oil field basically. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So I do think I do think that those trends matter for things like the startup economy in China. Right. Where we may see we will probably see a dip in early stage investment, which matters for innovation in cybersecurity and other areas.
Okay, now turning to your work at Stanford, how, if at all, does your research and work with students around these same topics of emerging technology and cyber risk and geopolitics and policy carry over to your work at Sagewood? Is there a situation where your research that you're doing with your students at school is something that carries over into your work, or vice versa? Things that you learned, at Sagewood is something you can teach your classes?
Yeah, there are definitely synergies between the two lines of effort. I have to be very, very careful to keep them separate in the sense that I don't. I'm always very clear about kind of what hat I'm wearing when I'm engaged in some activity, especially when it comes to research. There are ethical issues I want to make sure I'm on the right side of, conflicts of interest issues that I want to make sure I'm on the right side of. The consulting though keeps me fresh and engaged in, quote unquote, the real world.
Okay.
And I do bring that experience to my students. I think it enriches the classroom experience. And then, my research at the university on digital risks, it does inform the way I think, obviously, and advise, clients on other things. But when it comes to sort of the financial side, plus how I credit and sort of sign works, I'm very careful about maintaining that firewall of sorts.
Gotcha. So, but at the same time, it sounds like it's a way. I guess that happens with a lot of professors. You use your kind of research to keep because otherwise you're just teaching the same thing over and over and you get stagnant and stuff like that. So it's a way of keeping the water moving, I suppose.
Well, and it helps me, so the class that I teach that you mentioned at the top of our conversation, Fundamentals of Cyber Policy, is a survey style class. Meaning I have to cover a lot of ground, and making matters even more challenging is Stanford is on a quarter system, which means that our academic unit is a quarter, which is 10 weeks compared to a semester, which is 16 weeks. So I got to pack a lot of material into a much shorter period of time. And that means I have to curate the course pretty carefully. And my engagements sort of outside the university, whether that's through the consulting world, whether that's advising, continuing to advise informally parts of the U.S. government and the Hill, the Congress on legislation, helps me understand kind of what should students be learning about? How do I help them stay current? Because I want them to be able to get land killer jobs when they graduate, and that depends in many ways on sort of them being current, and hitting the mark in terms of what employers are looking for.
Well, good. That moves into my next question perfectly, because I was just about to ask about your program at Stanford, and I'm curious to know what type of works or positions are these people taking these classes trying to enter? Are your students primarily security professionals that are already in the industry, or is there a range of experience or ages to your students?
Yeah, there's a range of experience. Most of our students tend to come to us with a few years of work experience. I think the average age of our student is mid-late 20s. They come from a variety of backgrounds, ranging from former U.S. military to current diplomat with a foreign government's diplomatic service. And then, of course, students who come from the private sector and maybe want to stay in the private sector. So it's a very diverse group. It's very international. Something like 40% of our students are international students, which I think enriches the classroom experience because these issues are international. It's an international affairs program on top of that. So having that diversity, I think, enriches the program.
Yeah. Is this primarily an in-person on-campus class, or do you have a virtual component as well?
It's in person. It's a 2-year master's degree program. So students, and I mean, if you've ever been to Stanford's campus, that being on campus is a feature, not a bug. It's an amazing campus.
Sure, absolutely.
So students want to be here. Teaching, we taught remote during COVID, and it like it was for I think all students, a challenge. In the classroom.
Hey, Cyberwork listeners, I just wanted to remind you again that if you book a live online bootcamp from Infosec by December 31st, 2023, you'll get $500 off the price. There's no promo code needed. Just book your bootcamp before the end of the year, and it'll be $500 off the normal price. So AJ Grotto's background is in international cyber policy, and he's a top-level guy, obviously. He's worked under several presidents. So, but one common stepping stone to this type of work is cybersecurity compliance, which is why I want to walk you through ISC Square's CGRC certification and our bootcamp for it. This stands for Certified in Government Risk and Compliance. And knowledge of these frameworks and policies is crucial for information security, information system security officers, senior system managers, system admins, and anyone else wanting to learn more about the NIST-based information system security authorization process. So a couple of key points. I want to pull up the bootcamp and sort of show you what you will be learning in our CGRC bootcamp here. So to start with, I want to say that there is indeed a prerequisite here. You'll have to have at least 2 years of paid work experience in at least one of the 7 domains listed in the ISC Squared CGRC Common Body of Knowledge. And those include information security risk management program, scope of the information system, selection and approval of security and privacy controls, implementation of security and privacy controls, assessment, audit of security and privacy controls, authorization, approval information system, and continuous monitoring. If you've been doing one or more of those for more than 2 years, you're golden. If you have not, you can still take the test, but you will only be an associate level certified. So really put the years in first, and then come to us for CGRC, or just learn it. Do what you want to do. This certification is US DoD 8570.1 approved and ANAB accredited for the ISO IEC standard 17024. So this is a 3-day boot camp. You'll start out with our Infosec Skills platform and do the CGRC prep course. This will help get your feet wet, that you know what you're going to be learning for these 3 days. Day 1, in the morning and afternoon, you'll be doing risk management framework, which includes categorization of information systems, security control implementation, and monitoring of security controls. As always, in the evening, you'll have optional group or individual study time, which means if you don't feel like you completely understand a thing, you can jump back into the meeting area and talk with your fellow students and make sure that everything has stuck the way you wanted it to. Day 2, you'll be categorizing information systems in the morning, including information system, system security plan, categorizing a system, privacy activity, system boundaries. So you are starting to get the sort of full picture of it. And in the afternoon, you'll be selecting security controls, including setting a security control baseline and learning risk assessment as part of the risk management framework, which if you're not backwards and forward on the RMF, you will be after this. Again, evening, you'll have optional group or individual study. Day 3, implementing security controls, including implementing selected security controls, tailoring of security controls, and documenting of security control implementation. Also in the morning, you'll be assessing security controls. And then in the afternoon, you'll be authorizing information systems. So this is where you're going to really learn how to sort of take charge. You're going to be determining risk. You're going to be determining the acceptability of risk, which is going to be very crucial because you have to know what the acceptable risks are in order to do business. And then very crucially, you will be working with learning how to obtain security authorization decisions, which is going to really set you into a leadership track. And then following that, you'll be monitoring the security stake, including conducting ongoing remediation actions, updating key documentation, decommissioning and removing systems, and more. And of course, you'll be doing group and individual study in the evenings if you wish. And then following that, it is time to take the exam. And of course, we offer a 93%. So we offer a exam pass guarantee. We have a 93% pass rate on the first try. If for some reason you do not pass your exam on the first time, we will give you a second voucher to take the exam a second time. So whether you serve as a security counsel under a U.S. president or you stick to other NIST-based information system security authorization, it's very important to know that knowledge of governance, risk, and compliance frameworks and policies is a springboard to an amazing number of security jobs and career tracks. So again, to start the first or the next step of your career, go to infosecinstitute.com/free and browse the live online boot camps. Register before December 31st, 2023, and I can't stress this enough, it is $500 off. All right, back to the show. Now,
we don't want to go back to that.
No. Yeah, absolutely not. Fingers crossed. So, so it sounds like there's at least a baseline requirement in terms of existing knowledge or degree. I mean, what is sort of the sort of like pre-knowledge barrier to entry to taking your class? Like where should they be sort of in the hierarchy in terms of X number of years or X number of skill sets or degrees or certifications or anything like that?
Well, so students have to have their undergraduate degree, and we don't really care what degree they come to us with, as long as they have some quantitative skills, which students find different ways to express. The program does not presume any technical knowledge on the part of the student.
Okay.
Our expectation is that students who are facing a little bit of a deficit when it comes to their technical knowledge could pick that up during their time at Stanford, either through coursework, or I always encourage students, and I encourage your listeners too. I mean, Coursera has some really good offerings. And I've done some. I've sort of tested some of them myself, and I think they're like the Python class. I forget now who teaches it. Is excellent. And so I'll point students to those resources. But really, we don't require any specific technical background. It's a policy program. We want students to be able to tackle policy problems. It's not a program. We're not going to train students to go be CIOs, for example. Now, students may go into that role if they have the right background already, or they pick that experience up after they graduate. But that's a more technical role than I think we're preparing students for.
Gotcha. So because a lot of our students and listeners are currently or plan to practice cybersecurity in the U.S. military or the federal sector, or even just a vendor to these sectors, we've covered a lot in recent episodes about certain recent directives towards moving the Pentagon, for example, to 100% zero trust model in a very short period of time, as well as the larger but slower directive to do full asset discovery across all bureaus of the federal government across the coming years. And I know you're not currently, with the National Security Council, but do you have any thoughts? I don't know if you're following these out. Do you have any thoughts on these directives? Are there other policies in this style that you think need to be fast tracked to face some of the emerging threats around the world?
I support all those policies, and I think the only way to get them done is to put them on a fast track. Otherwise, they will always be second.
They're always going to be next quarter's priority. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So fast tracking them is really the only way to go. Patching cadence is a really hard challenge for all organizations, all large organizations. That's an area where I think the federal government continues to have work to do. DHS has put out these binding operational directives that direct agencies to patch all known vulnerabilities. But there needs to be follow through and sort of continued care and feeding of that, which I know the administration is doing, but it's one of those issues that needs to kind of constantly be on a fast track, because one of the most common ways that bad guys get into systems is not through 0 days, but by exploiting known unpatched vulnerabilities.
Right. Yeah. We've also had whole episodes about that. The pardon my French, the patch your shit approach. But when you're looking at hundreds of thousands of unpatched vulnerabilities and stuff, there also is that that notion of like knowing exactly all the actual entrance spots rather than to use another guest's very excellent comment, putting a perimeter fence around your garbage. Obviously that's all part of this sort of larger directive. I know in terms of prioritization and expediency, like you said.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, we're continuing to treat the symptoms of a disease, and where the disease is insecure software. And I know that is an area where the administration is starting to devote a lot more attention. This is a key theme in the National Cybersecurity Strategy. The idea that software vendors really need to step up and put out more secure products.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I think Microsoft in particular has some work to do here, given that something like 85% of the federal government's productivity market is sort of serviced by Microsoft. I think the dominance is even greater in operating systems, and so I think the vendors have to do a much better job putting out secure software in the first place. And I was delighted to see the administration call that out in the national cyber strategy that came out earlier this year.
Nice. That's good to hear. Glad to hear what you're seeing looks like it's to some degree or another on the right track. So, so for our listeners who plan to work towards this type of security work, who might be still further down the ladder, especially around international policy, risk, and geopolitics, can you talk about the type of places where they should be doing research, what they should be getting up to speed with very quickly in order to start moving into this type of work? Because I know a lot of people feel like they're juggling a lot of balls all at once. And then once you start adding things like policy and just like you said, bleeding edge technology and escalating threats and stuff, like where would you start if you were looking to get started learning about this stuff today?
So it's a tough question to answer because it's not going to stop me from answering it. But the reason why it's a tough question is there are so many different career paths in cybersecurity that it's difficult to generalize. Yeah. And I don't want to leave your listeners with the sense that there's sort of this flow chart, diagram that if they follow it, they will, land where they want. Because when I talk to students, my question back to them is, okay, well, what do you want to do? Right? I mean, what are the types of things you're interested in doing? Are you interested, if you're interested in doing sort of deep dive forensic work? Well, that's a career path, right? That requires, a set of technical skills, understanding of adversary tradecraft, knowing how to hack because, you have to think like a hacker in order to be a great forensic specialist. Or are you interested in developing offensive cyber operations where, there's still a lot of technical skill, but now, you have to also understand, okay, how do you translate, say military requirements into cyber speak? Into cyber operations, which is that's almost a management skill. And so, so there isn't a single path. For people who are just getting started, I think there are a lot of really interesting books out there that are relatively light reading that can give readers a real kind of feel or flavor of the field. Nicole Perlroth's book, "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends," is about the black market for zero-day exploits. That's a great book. David Sanger's book. I'm now totally blanking on the name, but if you go to Amazon or your neighborhood bookstore and look for David Sanger, he's a New York Times reporter. You'll find his book. Kim Zetter's books are all really good. So these are all options to take a look at. And then I think
is that New Cold Wars or The Perfect Weapon?
The Perfect Weapon, The Perfect Weapon. You got it.
And Fear and the Cyber Age. Okay.
Yep. Cool. Perfect Weapon. And what I like, what those books are good for is readers will see lots of different jobs portrayed in those in those books, right? And so if there's a character, a person in those books who, wow, like that person does something really interesting. That's me. That's what I want to do. Well, then you've got a little bit of a model to follow and potentially reverse engineer.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up this episode today, AJ, can you leave us with some aspects of global cybersecurity in the news or that you're watching that we should all be keeping an eye on, even if we're not actively working either in the government sector or in policy?
Yeah. So I've been involved in an effort to think about liability for insecure software. And so the way that software has been sold historically is on a license or as is, meaning that when you purchase the software, the vendor is disclaiming all warranties. So if the software breaks, they have no obligation to do anything about it. And the thinking, is that, well, for certain parts of the economy, particularly critical infrastructure, that model isn't good enough. And the question becomes, okay, if we want vendors to produce more secure software, one of the incentives is and this is, you can explain an awful lot of auto safety, right, which has come a long way in the last 60 years on this basis, in terms of liability, threat of liability. Now, this is a really hard problem because a threat of liability, if calibrated improperly, could have a real nasty impact on innovation. And so this is a really, I can't sort of overstate how hard a problem it is, but it's one that I think we need to start to tackle. It's also one that the Biden administration has also called out in the national cybersecurity strategy. And so you keep your eyes peeled for more talk. I think your listeners will start to hear more talk about this issue in the coming 6 months or so. And so, but that's been top of mind for me.
Okay, that's great. That's a great place to wrap it up here. So thank you for your time today. If we have one last question, if our listeners want to learn more about you, AJ Grotto, or your program at Stanford, or your organization, where should they go online?
Well, if they want to learn more about our program, the program is called the Ford Dorsey Masters in International Policy Program. If you just do a Google search for International Policy Stanford, you'll one of the first links will be our website. Take a look if you're interested at the intersection of cyber policy and international affairs. I think we are the best program in the world. I say that in all modesty. And so check us out. It's an amazing program. Plus, you get to live in beautiful, sunny Silicon Valley.
There you go. I mean, do you have a personal online presence yourself? Do you LinkedIn? Do you Twitter?
I LinkedIn, yeah, and then my company's website is sagewood.global. If people are interested in that.
Perfect. All right. Well, AJ, thanks so much for your time and insights today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
And thank you to all of our CyberWork listeners and video viewers, whether it's your first episode or you've been with us since the beginning. We're grateful to have you along for the journey. And if you have any topics you'd like to have us cover or guests you'd like to see on the show, drop them in the comments below. Before I let you go, I hope you'll remember to visit infosecinstitute.com/free to get a whole bunch of free and exclusive stuff for CyberWork listeners. This includes our new security awareness training series, Work Bites, which features a host of fantastical employees, including a zombie, a vampire, a princess, a pirate, and an alien, making security mistakes and hopefully learning from them. It's an hilarious and entertaining way to make sure you and your employees understand key security awareness concepts, so check it out. Also, infosecinstitute.com/free is the place to go for your free cybersecurity talent development ebook. Check out the in-depth training plans for the 12 most common security roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy manager, secure coder, and more. That and everything else can be had once you get yourself over to infosecinstitute.com/free. And yes, the link is in the description below as well. Thank you once again to AJ Grotto, and thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next week, we'll see you soon. Take care now.